This podcast is sponsored by Nutrofit, official distributor of Onnit supplements in the Benelux and powerful supplier of bulletproof and natural stacks. Your online place to buy supplements and training gear that will help you achieve total human optimization. Try with no risk with our Nutrofit money-back guarantee, shipping all across Europe within 24 hours. Find us at www.nutrofit.com.
All right, let's get the show on the road.
Okay.
It's been a long day, a long couple of weeks for you people, so I can imagine you look forward to some spare time. So
no, we've just given up on
spare time. Yeah, it's a dream, a distant dream. So to everybody checking in, welcome to another English episode of our podcast. Today we got something really special. As our listeners know, we like to talk about leadership and life crafting in our podcast. Goal setting is a very important part of that. And I think we managed to get one of the most foremost, maybe even ultimate expert on the part of goal setting in our studio today. He's a professor of psychology for the University of Toronto. He gained some notoriety in 2017 with a lot of discussion about Bill C-16, which referred to gender identity, but that's not something that we are really interested in touching on right now because of the controversy, because what it did, it placed our guest in the public eye, at least for me, and introduced me to his works, The Maps of Meaning and the Architecture of Belief, which I found very fascinating. And his most recent book, The 12 Rules for Living. And what, for me personally, what's very special is that this person has been in every podcast I listen to myself. From Joe Rogan to Sam Harris to Jocko Willink to Tim Ferriss. Very impressive, I might add. And it's a great honor to have you in our studio. Mr. Peterson, welcome to Holland.
Thank you very much.
Something I wanted to ask you, because I heard you say this at the event you were speaking at last, I think it was Friday.
Yeah.
The Dutch Lion. And it was your special relation, or at least the admiration you have for Holland and Europe in particular. Mm-hmm. And it almost seemed emotional.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, my wife and I have come here several times over the last... I came to Europe first in about 1980 and traveled around, and that was really good. But I've spent quite a bit of time here off and on over the last decade, partly because of the work that I've been doing in Holland at Erasmus University with Michaela Schippers and Ad Schippers. The second time ago, it was probably about 5 years ago, Tammy and I went through Europe. We drove through Europe, stopping at the sites that UNESCO had designated as World Heritage Sites, which included such things as a number of old medieval villages in East Germany, and we saw spectacular places. And Edinburgh is on the world list of heritage sites, and so is Bruges. And these places they're completely beyond belief. And I was talking to some well-known Dutch people last night, and asking them about how Dutch people regard their own culture, and increasingly they believe that there's a sense of shame that comes along with it, and and for the sins of the past, I suppose, real and imagined. And when I come here, I think Europe is it's a diamond. It's amazing, and Holland is particularly like that in many ways. Amsterdam is an amazing place, but the whole country, first of all, shouldn't even exist. That's the first thing, because it's underwater, and so to have this place even be is a miracle of sorts, and it's so well organized, and it's so full of opportunity for people, and it's so stable, and it's so free, and it's orderly and tolerant at the same time, which is a really difficult thing to get right. And there are parts of it that are just spectacularly beautiful. And so, and places like Bruges in Belgium, it's so beautiful. It's just unbelievable. Edinburgh is like that too, the downtown core. And I don't think I think people are in danger of forgetting exactly how improbable all of this is. And that's a big mistake in my estimation.
Yeah, I can imagine. And being a part of the European Union and living here, it's very easy to take it for granted.
Yeah, that's a big mistake.
Yeah.
You know, everything about what's working in the West is miraculously improbable. This is one thing I really liked about, I read Ayaan Hirsi Ali's book, Infidel, not long after she published it. And, you know, one of the things she said that really struck me was coming from her home country where things don't work very well, to put it mildly. The thing that struck her, there were two things about Dutch society that really struck her to the core. The first was that you could go up to the police and they would help you. They would help you. The police would help you. That she couldn't fathom, because that's not, the police are armed thugs in most countries. So in the vast majority of countries, the police are armed thugs and they live on bribery and corruption and oppression. And that's not the case here. Not to say that the police are perfect, but nothing is perfect. So that's not much of a criticism. And then the second thing she said, which she regarded as the second miracle, was that she was standing at a bus station where there was a digital sign. And the digital sign was counting down the seconds, minutes and seconds to the next bus. And then when the digital sign said that the bus would appear, the bus appeared.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of thing you take for granted. And you shouldn't, because her response to that was correct, which is, that's a miracle. And that's right.
Yeah.
And I think it's a miracle when the power is on and when the electronic communications work and when there isn't rioting in the streets and when everyone's fed. And we take this for granted at our peril.
I think we take, especially the civility that we have right now, we take that for granted. One of the jokes we make on this podcast, if you turn out the electricity or the running water for 2 weeks, see what happens. See what happens. See if that orderly structure remains intact. And the way we have it right now, it's really good. And even as Dutch people, well, we find stuff to, complain about a little. For example, what you said about the bus arriving on time. Go stand on one of our central stations in the middle of Holland where the trains come, and when they come 20 minutes later, we're all annoyed and they're really upset. Well, like you said, in other countries, it's a miracle if it shows up at the same day. So.
Well, and then you buy a ticket, and then you have to buy another ticket when you get on the train. And then, yes, I mean, things work here all the time. Yes. All the time. And they shouldn't, because things don't work. That's the fundamental thing about things, is that they tend not to work. So you have to put a lot of effort in to keep the infrastructure functional. And then there's this, so the infrastructure in Canada is functional, but Europe has something that Canada doesn't have, which is this staggering history of constructed beauty. And that's something that's really lacking. You see it in New York, you see it in Montreal a bit. I think Montreal is the best example in Canada, but you see it in spades in Europe, and that's why everyone comes here. They come here because they make a pilgrimage to beauty, and well, you don't want to take that for granted.
I think there's a psychological thing there, that everything that comes from far has a little bit more value, because the Louvre, I think if we get in the car right now, we can be there in like 4 hours, 5, 6 maybe, if we take it easy, but it's within a day's reach. I've been there once. You know what I mean? So it's all within your grasp. So that's why you maybe take it for granted.
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, people tend to assume that what they have around them that works can be ignored. And it's not surprising, because you have to ignore most things, and you might as well ignore the things that work. But when the things that work are so unbelievably unlikely, there should be a part of you that you keep conscious, that keeps going, oh, look, the lights are on. Isn't that something? Because they shouldn't be on. It's the natural state is not to be on.
Yes.
And the highways are working and everyone's fed and like.
Yeah, and I also think that a lot of people don't fully realize how much potential that gives you in your life. For example, I've worked with students, and every now and then you run into people that are not highly motivated and are maybe a bit resentful that they have to do the things that society makes them do.
Well, they also confuse what they have to do with what society makes them do. There's lots of things you have to do just to stay alive. Like you have to eat, and that has to come from somewhere. And you have to have clean water, and that has to come from somewhere, and you have to have shelter. So there's a misapprehension right there in people's attitudes. It's like, well, I'm forced to be a slave by society. It's, well, no, you're actually forced to be a slave by the fact that you starve to death, and that society is mostly an attempt to buffer you against that.
Yep.
So,
yeah, I agree with that. And the fact that we can do all these things in Holland, I mean, we have a pretty good schooling system. No one in Holland has to be homeless or has to be out of a job or has an opportunity to sort of get an education if you really want to. And, well, I think the students I work with, not everyone really realizes that. And I think there's almost a sort of obligation that flows from that. If you're born in Holland with all the opportunity you have here, it's such a shame if you don't put it to full use because, well, like we said, you sort of take it for granted. But, get in an airplane, fly for 2 or 3 hours, and you find an entirely different world.
Yes.
And I think if you walk around that world for a couple of weeks, you come back and you're like, let's get the show on the road.
Right, exactly. Well, which is a really good reason why you should go do that. Right. It's really useful to go somewhere where things don't work. You can do that metaphysically or psychologically or practically, but it's really useful. So then you know the difference between a place that works and a place that doesn't.
Yeah.
And it's also the case that if you live in a place like this and you don't take responsibility for what you've been given, let's say, or the opportunities you've been provided with, then the whole game comes shuddering to a halt, right? There is a tremendous amount of obligation and responsibility that come along with, let's call it the privilege, even though I hate that word, let's call it the privilege of belonging to a society like this. Right? It's demanding to keep it moving properly and working. But that's not something I think you should look forward to rather than feeling resentful about.
Yeah, and it's not like it's without its perks.
Right.
Like the perks lower in the Maslow, needs hierarchy. We tend to overlook those, but those are not, given in other parts of the world. So, yeah, I think it's really good.
Well, and some of it too is there's even more sophisticated things that are offered here, like the standard interpersonal transaction in the West between strangers is honest. That's the best thing we have. That's the most valuable thing we have. I always think about eBay in relationship to this because eBay was a miracle. And the reason that eBay was a miracle was because if you were a cynic, you would have assumed that the business model was flawed. So eBay unites strangers across the world, but let's say across the continent to begin with, to trade goods that are of no immediate use. Well, so the cynic would think, well, you'll send me junk and I'll send you a check that bounces and that'll be the end of that, right? And then eBay is a no-starter because it isn't going to work under those conditions. And so initially when eBay got going, brokerage agencies offered to take a proportion of the interaction to guarantee that the validity, the exchange, right? But it turned out that the brokerages weren't necessary because the default exchange between people was honest. People didn't send each other junk and everyone paid their bills. And the consequence of that was this immense pool of wealth was generated out of nothing but the ability to communicate, frozen currency.
Yeah.
And there's, I think, a real case can be made, both metaphysically, metaphorically, and practically, that the one genuine natural resource that the West has to its great benefit is trust. Trust is what makes people rich. Trust and honesty is what makes people rich. You say, well, does that mean all these poor countries are poor because they're corrupt? It's like, yes, to a much larger degree than people are willing to understand. So I suspect that if you could, first of all, I can't understand how any countries became not corrupt to begin with. Because once corruption is entrenched, it's so difficult to get rid of that it's almost impossible to imagine how it could even occur. Like people in the West, by and large, pay their taxes. Well, they don't in places like Greece. And we know what the consequence of that was. But in the West, basically, or in the Northwest, let's say, people pay their taxes. Well, why?
Yeah, that's a good question. What do you think caused that? Because the first thing my mind goes to, that might be something born from the Judean Christianity.
I think so. I think that's what it is. I think it's a consequence of the Judeo-Christian ethic.
But if you look at South America, where Catholicism and Christianity is also a big thing, they're known for their corruption.
Yeah, well, it's not the only thing. I also think that there were legal systems that developed that were also of great aid. And I would say at the top of the heap there would be English common law.
Yeah.
So there's a number of things that contribute, and it's hard to specify all of them. But the consequence of, and I don't think we understand them, but the consequence is that 99.9% of the time, when you engage in an interaction with a stranger, a financial interaction, you can assume that it's going to be a valid interaction. And that makes people rich because you can exchange with everyone then. So that's another kind of miracle. And it's very rare. Most cultures are not like that. Most countries are not like that. They're corrupt right to the damn core. And that doesn't mean it's top down. The politicians are corrupt, but bureaucrats are corrupt too, and so are the citizens. It's everywhere at the same time. So, and people expect bribery, and
maybe that's the problem, because it goes over all levels. One of the things that keeps bouncing in my head when we talk about eBay is the fact what they have in place there is also a sort of peer review system, where if you tend to be untruthful or you want to deceive someone, they can pretty harshly show that publicly in the company. Like, this is a bad trader. Do not. So we sort of banish these people.
Yeah, definitely. But what's interesting about eBay is, first of all, it worked before the relationship tracking system was in place. Now, I think the relationship tracking system helped eradicate psychopaths from the system, right? And those would be people who would move in, produce a lot of criminal activity, move out, start another business, do the same thing, right? So it's a lot harder to do that once the relationship or once the reputation tracking systems are in place. But even before that, it worked. So I had an interesting experience. One of my students, I lent my car to him, and he bumped it into a wall during an intense rainstorm, and I had to fix it. It was an old Cadillac, and I knew at that point that I went to an auto mechanic, and they wanted some insane amount of money to fix it. And so I went to, you can put a request for a used part online, and then different companies can bid to fill the request from all over North America. And this guy from southern US bid extremely low. It was a whole bumper assembly for the car. And I think the quote to fix it was $2,000. And I think he was going to sell me the whole part for $150, something incredibly inexpensive. And so he called me up and said that he'd do this. And I said, okay. And so about an hour later, he called me back and he said, did you want the bumper or did you want the bumper assembly, which would be with the lights and everything? I said, no. He said, in the quote, I said it was the bumper assembly. He said, I made a mistake, but it's okay. I'll sell it to you for that price anyways. And I thought, oh, well, that's pretty good.
That's nice.
And then half an hour later, he called me back again. And he said, look, I went out in the yard and I found the bumper assembly, and like there's a plastic trim piece on one side. And it's got a scratch in it. And I thought I better let you know just in case, you still, well, just because I thought I should let you know. And I thought, God, this is so perfect. It's like this guy, I've never met him. We'll never meet again. He offered me a deal that was actually to his financial detriment because he made a mistake. He honored it. And then even more, he went one step further. We went out and looked at the part. It wasn't perfect. He phoned me up and told me. I thought, Jesus, that's amazing. It's amazing. And then he sent me the part, and that was that. But, I pay attention to those things because they're not likely.
Yeah, they're small gifts.
Yeah. And they're kind of small gifts that enable people to be rich. So it's very useful to be able to trust people. It simplifies your life a lot.
I like these moments. We had a he is a stand-up comedian, but he's in a wheelchair, and he was a guest here, and he told us about how small gifts can make huge impact on people's lives. What happened to this person was, Jaap Bresses is his name. He was 30, he went on a holiday to Portugal, dove into the sea, hit a rock, broke his neck. Almost drowned, got rescued, had to be in a hospital for I don't know how many weeks. But he told me about his recovery, and he said there was only one thing that made me get on a stage and tell this story to other people, because I had one nurse and his name was Carlos. And the only thing that Carlos did was just for 2-3 minutes a day, he would come up to me and he would put his hand in my neck. It's a very small gesture for Carlos himself. But to me, he said it meant the world, because that's the only place I could still feel. And as he felt a little bit normal, and that helped him in his recovery. And that was such a comforting feeling, like, all right, I have some feeling left. This is going to be okay. And that gave him the mindset to fight through his recovery. And the thing was, Carlos didn't have to do that.
Right.
he had other stuff to do. He had a very busy job, but Carlos somehow instinctively knew, well, but this could mean the world to this guy.
Yeah,
and
that's a good
small
story.
gifts like that.
Yeah,
that
I have a chapter in my new book. The last chapter is called "Pet a Cat When You Encounter One on the Street."
I had questions about that
yeah,
one.
well,
Yes.
it's that it concentrates on the same thing. It's that if your eyes are open, even when things are dark, you can see a little bit of light here and there. And if you pay attention, then that might be enough light to get you through the darkness, so to speak.
Yes, exactly. And in turn, it inspired him to get on a stage and to start telling jokes about the situation what he's in. I mean, one of his shows is called Sit Up Comedian. I mean, because he's in a wheelchair.
Right.
He makes fun of his predicament. But at the same time, I find that very inspiring, and I guess other people as well. But it all started with a little gift from a nurse in Portugal that put a hand in his neck, and now he's inspiring thousands and thousands of people, me included. And I get to share this story. So yeah, I agree. It's these small things that can make big differences.
Yeah, it's because they're not
gifts.
so small. You know, they just look small, but they're not. I mean, that nurse, obviously, he knew what he was doing. You know, and that's really something. And now and then you're lucky you run into someone who knows what they're doing, and it can really make a difference.
Yeah. Although I wonder if people do it consciously or they just sort of know. They sort of feel that it's the right thing to do.
Well, it's a funny thing about that. You know, I mean, you tend to become what you practice. And then a lot of that becomes unconscious. It becomes implicit knowledge. And so he may not have thought it through, but he'd done whatever was necessary to be able to know how to do that. And then maybe it became deeply part of him, the nurse, you know. So it was something he did automatically. But that's expertise, and that requires a lot of conscious attention while it's being built.
Yeah, I can imagine. But at least that's what made me, that story came up when you told me about those small little gestures.
Yeah.
I call them winks from the universe as well. Every now and then you get this wink from, everything's going to be all right. Faith in humanity restored, sort of say.
Exactly.
Because it's hard not to lose faith every now and then when you look what's going on.
Yeah, well,
in the world
even if you look at what goes on with yourself, you know, because you've got your problems and you're not perfect, and it's easy to lose faith at a personal level or with your family or with society, but it's not helpful. And it does help a lot to look out for those bits of light. It makes a big difference. And especially if you know that that's possible, then you can open your eyes wide enough so that you're more likely to see them. If you get bitter enough, they just disappear completely. And then there's no way out of the bitterness. And that's not good. That's not good for anyone.
Yeah. I've heard a quote by Louis Theroux, which basically said, most men lead a life of quiet desperation. And if I go back to the beginning of this conversation where we talked about the wealth we have over here in Holland, then at some level, sometimes I have a hard time understanding that people in a country like Holland can have that, you know, desperation. Because they feel this bitterness, misery, they're not really particularly happy. One of the things that we found that, you know, helps people with that is getting proactive about their situation. And that was also one of the reasons for me to reach out to you when I heard you were in Holland, because you mentioned Michaela Schippers at the beginning. We had her in our studio as well.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, yes. And she told us a lot about the stuff you did at the university in Rotterdam, especially with the self-offering program in relationship to students. I heard you mention it on other podcasts, but I am fascinated by the fact that writing down a couple of things you want to accomplish have such a profound impact on your behavior later on. And the more I listened to your material, the more I started understanding, but there are deeper mechanisms at work here that you trigger once you start doing that stuff.
Yeah, the deepest of mechanisms even.
Yes.
I mean, you change the world you live in phenomenologically, psychologically, by changing what you aim at. And the reason for that is that you can't see much of the world. There just isn't enough of you. You have to ignore most of the world. I mean, obviously, you're not paying attention to what's going on in the country next to you in any real sense. So, for example, I mean, the fact that you're localized right here and right now means there's all sorts of things that you just physically can't attend to. But even in the space you're in, you're basically blind to everything that isn't serving the purpose that you're aiming at. Well, so that's worth thinking about. If you're blind to everything that isn't serving the purpose that you're aiming at, and you can't see anything good, then one potential conclusion is that you're not aiming at the right thing, because there's lots of things in the world that could manifest themselves to you. And I really mean this physically. It's a physical thing as well as a psychological thing. And so if all you see in the world is frustration, misery, cruelty, tragedy, and malevolence, and that's crushing you, then you can ask yourself, well, are you so certain that you're aiming at the right thing? Now, I'm not saying that all people suffering is a consequence of the inappropriateness of their aims. I think that's a big mistake, because there's an element of life that's sort of ineradicably arbitrary. Then that's...
You mean the randomness of the universe, basically?
Yeah, well, the fact that bad things happen to good people, it's basically as simple as that. Or terrible things happen to good people even. Or even that terrible things happen to bad people. There's a randomness element to it. And you don't want to get too high on your horse about that and assume that, if something bad happened to you, it's because it's your fault. Sometimes it's your fault. And sometimes there's something you could do to decrease the probability that will happen again. But sometimes you're just, you got hit by a bus and the bus jumped the curb, and that's just how it is. But having said that, you don't want to underestimate the degree to which you can change the way the world manifests itself to you by changing what you're aiming at. So then the question, of course, becomes, well, what should you aim at? And the first answer to that is, I should aim at something, right? Something, that's the first rule. Aiming at something is better than not aiming at something. So I wrote a fair bit about that in 12 Rules for Life too. There's a rule in there that says, compare yourself to who you were yesterday instead of who someone else is today. That's something that you can aim at. Even if you don't know what's up, you might be able to think, or what direction up is, you might be able to think, well, I'm reasonably aware of some of my flaws, and not flaws necessarily by other people's reckoning, although that too, but flaws by your own, that you've identified by your own internal sense of orientation, things about yourself that you're dissatisfied with that you could change. It's like, well, you could start changing those, like in small ways. That turns out to be way more powerful than people think. So, and then if you do something like the future authoring program that I worked on with Michaela, you not only do you start to outline what your aims might be, but you also start to treat yourself like you're the sort of person who can have aims. And that's a real revelation for many people, because they believe consciously or implicitly that life is something that happens to you. And fair enough, there's an element of life that happens to you, but it doesn't life doesn't happen to you any more than when you're captaining a ship, the ocean takes you where it wants to go, right? Sometimes the ocean takes you where it wants to go, and sometimes that's to the bottom of the ocean. But if you have a seaworthy ship and you're a decent captain, then you can make your way across the ocean, even if there's a storm. And that's a good metaphor, that sailing metaphor. It's also why I think people love sailing so much, because it has that metaphorical or metaphysical reality to it, as well as being something practical.
Plus the promise of bounty behind the horizon, probably, if you start moving towards a particular goal.
Yeah, well, that's it. And it's also it's a bounty that can increase as you progress towards it as well. It's like, well, I'd like things to be slightly better than they are today.
Yeah.
Okay, well, then tomorrow will be a little better, and then what you're aiming at is a little, grander, nobler, grander, both of those things.
You've improved your position. And that feels good in itself, and that gives you a sense of control, I think.
And a sense of hope, because if you've done it once, even a bit, you think, oh, well, I did it once. I can probably do that much again. And maybe I could even do more. And maybe if I practiced hard for like 10 years, I might get really good at this. And the thing is, people do get really good at it. They get amazingly good at it. And then you meet people now and then who, they're very astute captains of very powerful and fast ships. You think, well, how do you get there?
Incrementally, probably.
Yes, incrementally.
You start with a raft and you start building towards that speedboat. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And it helps to be healthy, and it helps to not have tragedy befall you, and all of those things. You need good fortune. You need to avoid the hurricanes to keep the metaphor going.
Although sometimes I wonder if sometimes you need the hurricanes to become a better captain, because a lot of the people that I've met that are really highly focused and goal-oriented also have some past trauma in their lives, that something happened to them that showed them that, well, life can be a bitch. And sometimes it's rough. And that sort of hardened them to do the things that they need to do in order to get to their goals.
Yeah, well, that's
a little bit better.
Yeah, that's an initiation process. Well, it is really useful to know the difference between something terrible and something unfortunate. And you need to have had a terrible experience before you can really distinguish between those two. And then you have to learn that, well, it helps you learn what you should be worried about and what you shouldn't be worried about, but it also helps you know that you're tougher than you think you are.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. It makes me think of a prayer. I'm not a very religious person, but once a friend of mine taught me a Christian prayer, which basically went along like, Lord, give me the strength to change the things I need to change, the peace to accept the stuff that I cannot change, and the wisdom to, differentiate between the two.
Yeah.
Which is basically
it's
what you're saying.
pretty good triplet of sentences, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that one.
Well, and with the future authoring program, so we replicated some of the research that was done with Michaela in Canada at a little college called Mohawk, and we brought under, I would say, suboptimal conditions, and that was purposeful. We brought students into the college during their orientation day in the middle of the summer, and we had them do their future authoring program where they lay out their vision for their friendships and their education and their career goals and the plan that they might want to implement to deal with temptations like drug and alcohol use and their use of free time, their productive use of free time and their physical and mental health, and ask them to write about what their life could be like in 3 to 5 years if they were treating themselves properly and were on a good pathway, and then also to write about how terrible their lives could be if they let their bad habits. And the effect of that, even they only wrote for an hour, the effect of that was that they were about 35% more likely to stay in school.
Yeah, because that's something I was really interested in when I was talking with Michaela. The increase in study results with the students who did these interventions. Yeah. She also mentioned the importance of reflection on your goals after that, but still the prime mover is setting your goals and moving.
Yes, to have that initial vision.
What surprised me about that is because I have done the self-offering program, I've fulfilled it, how relatively small that intervention is. Of course, it requires thinking, but I think if you did the future offering a bit without the value part, you can do that in an hour and a half. Right. And the impact is huge. And what I especially found very valuable for me was the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Because mostly when we do goal setting, we go for, we're going to make the biggest podcast, we're going to become millionaires, rock star lifestyle, everything. And you think about that and you dream about that. But what motivates me most still to this day is the nightmare I wrote down.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
that was so impactful.
Absolutely. When we first developed the Future Authoring Program, it was a positive vision program plus a strategic plan, right? But then, I had read this really interesting study in a book called The Neuropsychology of Anxiety by Jeffrey Gray, and it's a great book. It's a very, very difficult book, but it's a great book. It lays out the neurology of our response to novelty and uncertainty, both positively and negatively. And he outlines hundreds of studies of animals in that book, and one of the studies was a study of motivation, technical study of motivation in rats. Let's say you want to motivate a rat. Okay, so first of all, you make him hungry, and he'll work for food. So then maybe you have him learn this maze. He has to run the maze to get the food reward, and so he runs it a few times. He knows there's food there. So you put him at the beginning of the maze and you let him go, and then you watch how fast he goes to the maze. Now, there's a couple of ways you can measure his motivation. You can attach him to a spring and have him pull against the spring, and then you get some estimate of how much work he's willing to put in to go down the maze, or you can time him. Okay, so now imagine you got your hungry rat and you let him go at the beginning of the maze, and he zooms up to get the food, and he's moving at like 10 miles an hour. But now you do something different. You put him in the same place, but as well as him being hungry and going after the food, you waft in a little bit of cat odor.
Danger.
Now, rats hate cats. They can't stand them. Even if they've never met a cat, they can't tolerate the odor. It really terrifies them. And so that rat will run towards that food much faster than he will if he's just hungry. And so like if you want to run towards something that you want, it's really useful to be running away from something you truly don't want.
Yeah.
And I thought about, so that's part of the reason we built that into the system. And I had a metaphysical take on that too, which is like many religious systems have a kind of notion of something like hell that's very well developed in Christianity. And so hell is where you end up when you lie. That's one way of thinking about it, in a very good way. You might think, well, is there any psychological utility in that idea? And the answer is, yeah. You need to know where you could end up if things went wrong, because then you're motivated by fear to move forward. If you're not motivated by fear to move forward, then your fear's in front of you stopping you, because you might think, oh my God, I can't take the risks necessary to attain these goals. What if something goes wrong? Well, it's like, yeah, well, then you're frozen. But if you think, no, wait a second, there's risks to proceeding, but nothing compared to the risks of failing. So then the fear is behind you, pushing you forward. That's so you need a vision of hell. It's like, okay, what's your personal vision of hell? You let your life fall apart because of your own stupidity and your own blindness. It's like you're the worst place you could be in 5 years. Well, that's what we ask people to write about.
It's a great counter against the phenomena I've seen with people who start working with roadmaps and they just go at it from the positive viewpoint, is that they run out of motivation juice. Out of juju. They're like, all of a sudden, like, yeah, we want to do this. And then after a couple of months, it sort of ebbs away.
Right, exactly.
And I've always been wondering, how do you like manage that? You can do intervision, you can do reflection. That's all great. And it has its benefit, definitely. But lighting a fire behind you.
You bet, man.
That works.
Nothing like consulting your existential terror. And you think, well, I'd rather go out and party tonight. I shouldn't be working on this. I'd rather go out and party. It's like, well, why not? It's like, oh yeah.
There's a limited amount of time, and yes, every minute we throw away. Yeah, I completely understand. So if you look at
arithmetic helps too.
In which sense?
Well, this is something I've done with big groups of students and my clients as well. It's like, okay, I ask students in particular between the ages of say 18 and 20. It's like, well, how much time do you waste in a day? Is it an hour? People say no. Is it like 4 hours? No. 10? No. It's usually about 6. I can get a group of 200 students to agree that they're just wasting 6 hours a day. No, and by their own definition of wasting, right? So, okay. So then we do some mathematics with that. We've got the 6. That's fine. 6 hours a day. Okay. So that's 40 hours a week. All right. So then I think, well, what's your time worth? And they think, well, minimum wage, because most of the students, if they went out and worked, they'd only get minimum wage. But that's not right, because that's a discounted version. Their time is worth way more than that if they're working on something useful, because it's an investment. So it's perfectly reasonable to assume that if you're a reasonably bright student, your time is worth $25 an hour, something like that, and because of its potential for future payoff. It's okay. Well, that's $1,000 a week. Right. So it's $4,000 a month. It's $50,000 a year. In 4 years, it's $200,000. So that's what wasting your day is costing you. It's like, let's make no mistake about it. You're going to be $200,000 poorer in 4 years because you're wasting your time. Is that really what you want to do? You're rich enough so that you're willing to forego that $200,000. Well, no one's ever sat them down and said, look, put an estimate out of the value of your time. Figure out how much of it you're wasting, and then ask yourself if you really think that that's a good idea. Because it's actually not a good idea. And I don't think anybody thinks it's a good idea.
Yeah. Damn straight. I think it ties into if it gets measured, it gets managed. The moment you start putting stuff down in numbers, that does something to our brain.
Yeah. Well, it's part of the goal setting issue. It's like you calibrate things and make them precise. You can no longer hide from it. And the funny thing too is that, because I also ask the classes the same thing. Well, do you enjoy yourself while you're wasting that time? And the answer is always no. People feel terrible. It's like, they're watching one YouTube video after another that they're not even interested in, or they're watching like endless amounts of pornography or some damn thing. Or they're playing video games, not because they want to, but because they can't stop. And they know they should be doing something else. It's not enjoyable time. So not only is it and that's part of why it's wasted. It's like, it's not productive and it's not enjoyable. Well,
So how much of that procrastination is because setting goals is a great counter to that. So how much of that behavior, if you look at it, because it's not rational behavior, is also sort of kind of same like goal setting, wired into us because of our evolutionary path? I've always wondered about procrastination in myself. Like, why am I like that every now and then?
That's a good question. Well, look, procrastination needs no explanation. The answer to should you do something difficult and energy intensive is no, because it's difficult and it's energy intensive, right? So there actually has to be your default position can easily be, no, I'm not going to do that difficult and intensive thing. There should be some internal resistance to doing that because it's costly. Okay, well, but then you think, well, wait a second, there are conditions under which investing in something intensive and energy demanding is appropriate. Well, yeah, but you got to specify the conditions. Like, why should you listen to yourself? You could think about it this way. Why should you listen to yourself if you're an idiot? You know what I mean? If you don't have a plan, your body's thinking, no, I'm just going to sit here and take it easy because who knows when the next antelope is going to come along so I can kill it. I'm just going to lie here like a lion and wait. Yeah. It's like, no, you need a reason that's a bad idea.
Yeah, and I think a track record, like the goals and the reasons and and that you've already chased after a few antelopes, for example, and you've actually managed to do it. So you can.
Well, there's that too. You know, because your deeper self might be saying, well, you want me to get up and do something. What makes you think I can trust you? You know, you're not just running down some blind alley. Well, if you've had some victories, you can say, no, we're serious about this. And so, and then the goal setting too, like I would think about it more like, it's more like the development of a vision. It's a better way of thinking about it, I think. Because goals, it's a bit narrow in a sense. The idea is that you can have a vision of the future and a counter vision. And that you, not only can you have it, you need that. It's without that, you won't move forward against your procrastination. And you need real reasons, and terror is a good one. Terror is great, man.
Yeah, I've noticed that in myself as well. Like I said, the part of the intervention from the self-offering program I think about most is the negative scenario. I'm like, no, that's not going to happen.
So what did you envision? And I don't want you to expose anything that's too personal, but what did you envision when you thought about what the way things could fall apart?
Yeah, well, by for example, shying away from the stuff that scares me will make sure that I don't, for example, with this podcast, sometimes we have to do stuff that, well, we find a little scary, or we have to talk to people in front of a crowd, which is always a little scary as well. And I have been known for myself to be either really risk-seeking in the adrenaline sense or really risk-averse. And if I, feed that risk-averse behavior, I'm going to go out of the way of challenges which will bring me a great bounty or a great reward or knowledge or whatever. And I have always, in life I've shied away from challenges like that, especially in my youth. And one of the things I wrote down, that's not ever going to happen to me again, or stuff that I went through when people opposed me in the pursuit of my goal, and I had to fight for my right to proceed. And I wrote stuff down that might happen to me if I get overwhelmed by other people or don't stand up for myself. And that every now and then when I get in situations like that, that's what pops to mind. I'm like, I have to fight for it.
Right. Well, to lay out a vision of yourself as a weak failure 5 years down the road should be sufficient, and to really think through what that means, right? You're sick of yourself, you're bitter, you're resentful, you're angry, you're physically ill, you're depressed, you're anxious, you're hopeless, and you're of no use to anyone. So you're also making not just yourself miserable, but you're actively setting out to make the people around you miserable because you're so angry, and you're not good for them. It's like, then you think that through. Is that the way that I want to live my life? Minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day. It's like, hopefully, if you really think that through and you allow yourself to feel it, then you think, no, how about we don't do that? That sounds like a bad idea. We'll just not go there.
I'm pretty sure it is a bad idea. The thing I'm wondering about, though, when I think about these things like goal setting and why we do these things and why we don't want to be that particular loser, if you look at the inner mechanics of man, we've had pretty smart neurologist in this podcast, like Dick Swab. He's like one of our foremost specialists in that area. He's like, well, if you go to the core, it's basically two things: survival and procreation. That's basically the biological trick you're trying to do. You're trying to pass on your genes. How do you look at that particular statement? Do you think that's true, that if you go back to the core of what we do, it's biology?
I think I would say yes and no. I think there are very useful reasons to carve up the world in that way. When you're playing a game that's biological analysis and you're looking for similarities between human beings and other animals, you're looking for continuity across the life, you can certainly point to the necessity of survival and procreation, which are variations of the same thing in some sense, right? I mean, procreation being long-term survival in the longest sense. And obviously, our motivations serve those functions because otherwise we wouldn't be here. But I would also say that that notion, when applied to human beings, it's narrowly reductive in a non-helpful sense. It's too bare bones because we're certainly not only striving for survival, or we have to expand the notion of what survival constitutes. We're striving for something like optimal existence. Like there's a metaphysical and spiritual element to human beings that might just be a genuine biological consequence of our higher order cognitive function, but it has to be taken into account. You're not just trying to survive. It's survival under a certain set of conditions. You want to optimize your life, and that brings in the entire domain of values. And you're not trying to procreate. It's not exactly that. If you were, you'd just go to a sperm bank, right? Because that's the most efficient way of taking care of that problem by an order of magnitude, right? No investment and plenty of offspring. You're not trying to do that. And I think that kind of biological reductionism is useful as a tool, but it's not useful as a metaphysical or psychological outlook. And I think that's because it is actually too narrow. What we seem to be doing is a process of, and you can see this in this thinking in biologically oriented psychologists like Jean Piaget, is that we're trying to play a kind of game that's self-maintaining and self-improving. That's what we're after, and we're really oriented towards that even biologically. So to reduce it to something like the mere struggle for survival, it's like each rat against every other rat. There are domains in which that's useful analytically, but it's not sufficiently sophisticated to serve as a philosophy of being.
The reason I ask is because I once heard a statement that basically went like, everything psychological is biological. And it was like in a discussion about free will. Like if the universe is deterministic, that everything you experience in your mind is sort of a result of brain chemistry, which is a result of what you ate, which is a result of...
Yeah, it's a silly argument, I would say, because it's true, technically, it's true that everything psychological is biological. And it's true technically that everything biological is physical. But the problem with that is that there's an inference there that if we could just make it physical, we would understand it, and it would end up to be deterministic. It's like that's a Newtonian worldview. We know that that's not even true because at the most fundamental level of material reality, the world is not Newtonian. It's quantum.
Quantum mechanics, yes.
Right, and it's weird. At the quantum level, it's weird, to say the least.
Yeah.
And so it is true that everything psychological is biological. And it is true that everything that's biological is physical. But it isn't true that we understand what physical means. And so it looks like a reduction to a level of simplicity that we can comprehend. But it's not. So let's say, when we finally become fully reductionistic and we can explain everything psychological biologically, if that ever happens, which is unlikely, by the way, and then we can explain everything biological physically, what we mean by physical will be so different by then that it'll bear almost no relationship to what we mean by physical now.
Because we go to the most lower level, and the rules that apply there are completely different than they do in our...
We know that already. That's the revelation of quantum mechanics, is that things at the bottom are very, very strange, to say the least.
I was told that people that say they understand quantum mechanics don't really understand quantum mechanics, because it's so alien.
The people who understand it mathematically. That doesn't mean they can understand it conceptually. And I think part of the reason they can't understand it conceptually is because our concepts are grounded in our, let's say, our motor understanding. Like objects at our level of resolution, which is sort of halfway between the quantum and the cosmic, something in a logarithmic scale, we're about halfway between the quantum and the cosmic. There are objects that manifest themselves at our level of resolution, like a cup. Well, a cup's a pretty deterministic object, and you can get a grip on it. You can understand it, right? And understand it means that when you interact with it, it does what you want it to do. And then you can think, well, the world is made up of things like cups, except they're smaller. It's like, well, that's true, until they get really small. And then they're nothing like cups. They're nothing like anything we can understand. And so we can't understand them because they're outside of the realm that our understanding operates within. So the reductionist argument is a good one. It's good to reduce something complex to something simple if, when you reduce it to something simple, it enables you to work with the more complex thing better, right? You don't want your model to be any more complex than necessary to work. But the idea that we can reduce our psychological complexity to biology is like, well, perhaps, good luck with that. We certainly aren't able to do that at the moment.
No, because I had a few holes in that chain of reasoning myself. For example, because if those prime directives are true, survival and I have a hard time fitting in, for example, Christians in the time of, for example, when they did the Inquisition, and you could be thrown for the lions or burnt at a stake for believing certain things. That does not fit in either two of those categories. I mean, that's pretty exclusive, even if you're willing to let yourself be burned at a stake, that's not very good for your survival. And still people are willing to do that. And that kind of taps into that thing that people can do. And I think you call it establish a relation with a transcendental value.
Right. Yeah, well, I think that's a good observation. I mean, people don't live out survival at all cost. Like some people do, sometimes. But the ethic that motivates people, that's a fundamental ethic, isn't survival at all costs. And I think if you actually look at how people behave, you see quite frequently that they don't act as if it's survival at all costs, and certainly not procreation at all costs. And I mean, I'm not, as I said before, I'm not trying to deny the utility of a Darwinian worldview. It's an incredibly powerful tool, but you can't reduce human ethics to, you can't say that human ethics are invalidated by the biological reality that the Darwinists have outlined. You can't say that. And you can't say that the ethic itself is somehow superfluous or wrong because it isn't in accordance with these basic two presuppositions. It's not, the world isn't that simple. So, you know, what the evolutionary psychologists do in some sense is strip away all the excess and look for basic principles that guide human beings, and they find that quite frequently. But you don't want to extend the analysis beyond its domain of utility.
Yeah, and I also had a hard time placing something you talk about a lot as well, like the hero's narrative, altruism, doing something that's not necessarily immediately beneficial for you, but for others as well, because that kind of seems to contradict that as well. But it is a very fascinating part of the goal setting, sort of. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, what happens when people start, setting their life straight, and they sort of start on this symbolic journey that like is in everything of human history, basically. Well,
I guess the first part of the symbolic journey is the idea itself that it's worth aiming for something valuable, right? So that's the first transcendental idea. There's something valuable you could aim at. Okay, it's a hypothesis. And you say, well, if there is something valuable to aim at, then what might it be? Well, you have to consult with yourself to discover what that is. And then you start to pursue it, let's say. And then you find that when you pursue it, obstacles arise and things that you don't know manifest themselves, things that you don't understand. Well, what do you do in a situation like that? You give up? You stop pursuing the goal? Well, there's a couple of possibilities. You can modify your goal a bit because maybe you were wrong. Mm-hmm. So that's a thing to keep in mind with the setting, with the establishment of values and the elaboration of a vision. You start out with a provisional vision, but you should also always think subject to modification if necessary. Because as you move forward and gain experience and knowledge, then your ability to formulate a vision is going to grow. So you want to have the vision, but you don't want to grip it so tightly. Then you become a kind of utopian ideologue, something like that. You want to think, well, I think this is better than what I've got, and I'll move towards it, but I'm willing to alter my viewpoint, and I'm willing to learn as I go. So you hit an obstacle, you hit things you don't understand, you modify your vision maybe, or you explore the things you don't understand that are getting in your way, and you build the world as a consequence of that exploration. You build yourself, you build the world out of what you explore. And then that there's more of you then, there's more to you then, there's more to your vision. And that's really, in some sense, that's the simplest possible way of construing the hero's journey, is that you confront what's unknown, you establish something of value, you proceed towards it, you confront what manifests itself as unknown on the way. You learn from that, you reconfigure the structure, and you repeat. And sometimes that's going to mean you take yourself apart to some degree, because you move ahead, you think, I've got this goal, I can do it. You implement it and you find out, no, that's a little too lofty, that goal for me. I failed. I'm not quite who I thought I was. I have to take myself apart painfully, put myself back together, try a little less ambitious aim, and repeat. But that's okay. That's okay. That's all part of the same process.
Have you ever heard of Scrum?
Yes.
Yeah, you described Scrum for life, basically, just now. Because what Scrum is a development tool they used in software. I'm a tech guy. We learned in software that if you want me to make a computer program for you and you describe it to me, and we start making it, and I show you the final product, that's going to be nothing like what you wanted. And the best way to create a complex desired outcome is to do it in small iterations, because as you progress towards your final goal, you're going to learn stuff, and you're going to have in Dutch we call it voortschrijdend inzicht. It's like you gain extra knowledge that influences your desired outcome in the end.
Exactly.
And what I've seen with people who start setting goals is that they're like afraid, like if they make a roadmap or something, that's going to be a tattoo. Or something like that. It's not set in stone. It's going to change. I hope it changes, because that means you've progressed along the way. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, the probability that you can aim at what you should be aiming at in your current state, especially if your current state isn't very good, is low. But yeah, I mean, when we develop software, because I've developed software, we do exactly that. It's like, well, let's sketch out a rough draft, and I do this when I'm writing. It's like, well, we'll do a bad first draft. There's nothing better than a bad first draft.
Shitty
terrible
first
draft. And you can do that. I do this with my students when I'm talking to them about writing their thesis. It's like, I said, look, you're going to be afraid of writing your thesis. It's for sure, because it's a developmental milestone, Go home, write the worst PhD thesis you can in 3 days. And if you hit an obstacle, just jump over it. Write down, I hit an obstacle here, I don't know what to say, and go on. And just lay it out, sketch it out, And they come back and they say, hey, that really worked. I mean, I can write a really bad PhD thesis. It's like, okay, good. Sketch the thing out. Well, now go fix it up. Well, I can fix it up. It's like, well, keep doing that until it's good enough. And goal setting or the establishment of a vision is like that. The first thing you need to know is that you need to have a vision. It's like the second thing you need to know is your vision isn't going to be very clear. It's like, okay, no problem. Do it badly. You can do that. And then make some progress, and then revise. Progress, revision, progress, revision, progress, revision.
Yes.
That's fine.
I think that's also the reflection part that Michaela referred to Like if you progress towards your goal, it's good to sit down every now and then and just think like, how is stuff going?
Yeah.
How are we progressing? What can we do to improve this?
Yes, well, that's when you want to have honest conversations with the people around you in your business too. It's like, you take stock. You don't want to do that every second because you drive yourself crazy, right? You got to develop the vision, implement for a while, and then evaluate. But when you implement, you generate new information, and then you can make a new plan out of that information. It's more than that too. That this has been discovered in recent years. So let's say that you said, for example, that you were nervous about public speaking. Many people are nervous about public speaking, and it's not that surprising. Mm-hmm. But let's say you decide that you're going to go out and speak in public. Okay, so now you're like an animal who's going into new territory. And you're just exactly like that, in fact. It's exactly what's happening, is you're an animal going into new territory. Now, you need to develop some new skills. And so you might think, okay, well, what's happening is you watch yourself talk, and you listen to people's feedback, and you gather information about your performance, and you build the new you out of that information. Okay, that is happening. That is happening. But that's not all that's happening. Here's something else that's happening. So when you put yourself in the new environment, there are genes that switch on in your brain that weren't on, and they code for new proteins, and that builds new structures in you. So it's not only that you're gathering information and building yourself out of the information and encoding it, it's that you're turning on switches inside of you to activate parts of you that weren't on before. Mm-hmm. And so you might think, so there's this old idea that's represented in the Chartres Cathedral. There's a maze in the cathedral, right at the point. The cathedral's in a cross shape, and the maze is at the bottom of that. And it's a symbolic pilgrimage. So the idea is that you're going on a symbolic pilgrimage to Jerusalem, essentially, and the center of the world. So the holy city, let's say. So the ultimate ideal, that's what it is, the holy city, the city on a hill. Okay, so the maze is a circle. It's quite large. And you go in one quadrant. It's divided into four. Mm-hmm. So you can think of the circle as north, south, east, and west, right? And you go in at the bottom of one of the quadrants, and then you walk that entire quadrant, and then you have to walk the next one. And then after that, you walk the next one. And then you walk the next one. And then after you've walked every square inch of every quadrant, you get to the middle. Well, so what does that mean? It's like a pilgrimage. It's like, well, you're some naive, like medieval guy, and you've never gone outside your village more than 2 miles, right? So what the hell do you know? You don't know anything. And then you decide you're going to go on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. It's like, you're not going to be the same person when you come back. And it isn't just because of what you've seen and done. It's because the demands that have been placed on you, because you've put yourself outside of your zone of comfort, turn on all sorts of switches in you that make you into something that you weren't. And this symbolic pilgrimage of going to every corner of the world before you get to the middle is a representation of that. So you want to put yourself outside your domain of comfort while you're pursuing your goals. You stretch yourself. And then more of you manifests itself, partly from the information, but also partly just biologically. There's more to you than you think. And there might be way more to you than you think.
Yeah. I think it's exposing yourself to friction as well. It's just getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, which would equips you to deal with challenges better, I guess.
Well, that's a key to resilience. Like, I mean, if you're someone who's relatively high in negative emotion, so that's trait neuroticism, so you're kind of an anxious person, and maybe your anxiety's getting your way at times. It's like, okay, well, how do you deal with that? Well, you do precisely that. You bring yourself to the brink of intolerable discomfort. You don't do that just willy-nilly, but you find out that, well, maybe in order for you to be an effective podcast host, you had to learn to speak in public. So it's like it's a challenge that if you want to get to your goal, you actually can't avoid. Well, so then what do you do about it? Well, maybe you talk to one person first, and then you talk to 5 at a time, then maybe 10, and you push yourself just beyond your level of comfort. Where you can do it, it's called the zone of proximal development. That's Vygotsky's idea. It's that, and that's the border between order and chaos in my formulation. And what happens is you get more courageous, you get more skillful. It's genuine. It's not just psychological, It's real.
And I also think you stretch your reference. If you're used, for example, my co-host and me, we both do martial arts. And the joke we make is that if you do martial arts on a regular basis, but you're also in business, and you go to a meeting, that's a little bit, maybe it's going to be a tough talk. You're going to have to with someone. And usually people, they kind of tend to be, they're not too fond of doing that. It's a little scary.
Conflict averse.
Yes. But the joke we make, at least no one is trying to pull your head off.
Right, exactly.
Because we're used to guys trying to pull our heads off. And if you're in tough conversation, nobody is physically assaulting you right now. So it's not that bad.
Yeah, I had a client a while ago who did stick fighting. Right, and he was trying to discipline himself, and he would go stick fighting, and people were beating each other like half to death with sticks. It was like hard. And so he gave him a reference point. It's like, well, this is a lot better than being beat by someone with a stick. It's like, that's useful to know. It's absolutely, I think part of the reason that in archaic societies, the young men are initiated so brutally often is to give them a reference point. It's like, this is bad, but it's not as bad as that 2-week period when you were 13 that you spent at the bottom of a pit in the dark with nothing but your own fear and nothing to eat. And you didn't know if anybody was ever going to come back to see you. And you were plagued by the demons of your imagination.
Well, that's a pleasant idea.
It's not that bad. It's like, and I got through that. Well, okay, that's extremely useful. It's extremely useful to know the difference between the limits of your tolerance and something that's just a mild inconvenience.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I have, if you look at that hero's journey, for example, and you see people confronting their proverbial dragons, so to say, it's related a bit, but a bit unrelated at the same time, because it goes back to that biological background we all had. And I think I heard you say somewhere that the symbology, for example, of the snake or the dragon stems straight from for example, our vision was developed because we wanted to detect snakes and stuff like that. So the value, or at least the meaning of a serpent in Western culture, and I heard you talk about the dragon, and what we in the West tend to do is we chop off the dragon's head. But if you look at the dragon of Asia or Japan, that has a different sort of meaning. That's a sage or a symbol of wealth or at least prosperity.
Well, even in the West, the dragon hoards gold, hoards a treasure, or maybe hoards virgins, right? So the dragon has something of value. And you might say, well, do you concentrate on the dragon or do you concentrate on the value? And there's another twist in it too. Is like the dragon is associated with that which lurks beyond the confines of what's understood. Well, let's say that you live in a society that's pretty loose and what you need is order. Then you confront the chaos and you tame it. But let's say you live in a tyranny. Everything's ordered. It's like the chaos might be something that's really positive. And I think that because Asian societies got civilized before European societies and even became tyrannical in their orderliness, that the symbol of chaos was more positive than it was in the West. We had more than enough chaos, so the symbol of chaos was mostly negative.
It might represent a bit of freedom there because they're so structured.
Exactly that.
Yes, I get it. So, all right. I was wondering about
the dragon of chaos can be freedom if you're in a tyranny. So yeah, I think so. All of these symbols have this capacity to flip into their opposite valence. It's like order's good. Well, wait a second. Not if there's too much of it. Chaos is bad. It's like, no, not if there's none of it. Right? You want some chaos. It keeps things alive. It keeps things unpredictable and keeps them interesting. So whether chaos and order are good depends on where you're standing. And well, that's the right way to think about it. And then the valence of the symbols associated with them would switch in that regard. So,
yeah. They always seem to protect something of value. And the thing that also triggered me, I heard you describe that you get contacted by people that start calling themselves, what was it, religious atheists?
Christian atheists.
Christian atheists, yes.
Yeah.
And that's something that actually got me thinking as well, because I used to be a very militant atheist from the rational point of view. I mean, Noah and a boat and all the, the stuff that you can poke holes in that. But then I started listening to your lectures, and like you described, a relation with a transcendental value, in combination with what I heard you say about the postmodernists that kind of break everything into ration, and that's why you actually can't even, talk about stuff anymore, because you're just trying to impose your particular goals. I'm trying to impose my particular goals, but that's at a human level. So if you place one thing above that's more important, that kind of transcends all of that, and it kind of makes you go towards that. So,
well, it looks like there's some necessity in some sense for a transcendental ideal. So, because you might say, well, let's say it's just power. Mm-hmm. Well, who's the king responsible to that? To then? The answer is no one. The king is responsible to no one. Okay, now you have a tyranny. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's say instead that you've posited a transcendental ideal that even the king is subject to. Okay, well now even the king has a conscience. Well, that seems, not only does that seem better, it seems necessary, mm-hmm. because I would say that a tyrannical king not only kills everyone, he also kills himself. It's not a good game. Mm-hmm. Now, and I've tried to conceptualize the transcendental ideal practically and biologically. I would say, well, the king has to serve the principles that enable the king to survive and maintain being a king. Right? Because if you're going to be king, if you want to be king, part of what you have to do is act in such a manner that you're likely to continue to be king. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you have a scientist in Holland, Frans de Waal.
Yeah.
Right, and so he's studied this deeply. He's studied chimp kings. And he's tried to figure out, okay, well, if you're a chimp king, how do you stop the other chimps from tearing you apart and devouring you? Because when chimps go to battle for dominance, it's not pretty, and they will gang up on each other. And so de Waal was interested. It's like, okay, let's say you have the dominant male. What characterizes the dominant male who's likely to survive? Because the thing about being the dominant male is two subordinates can take you out. So even if you're the toughest guy, it's like three of your enemies are still going to be able to take you out.
Too much, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So then what the case is that you have to act, if you're the dominant male, in a manner that doesn't encourage three of your subordinates to take you out. Well, that turns out you can't be too much of a tyrant. So if you're a chimp overlord and you're going to be successful, turns out you have to treat the females pretty decently and their infants. And then it also turns out that you have to have friends. You have to do some reciprocal grooming. There has to be some reciprocity in your interactions. Like, you get groomed because you're the king, but you also do some grooming because you need some friends. Mm-hmm. And so if you're just the bang 'em up, like crush 'em sort of chimp, brutal tyrant, and you're having an off day, it's like, you better look the hell out, because you're going to end up like bloody and dead. So the transcendental ideal, in some sense, emerges out of that, is that even the tyrannical chimpanzee has to follow a set of transcendent principles or he'll end up dead. Now, you might say, well, are those divine, those principles? Well, that's a different question, because then you start to mix metaphysics with biology. But at least you can say, this is the Christian atheist part. It's like, well, divine or not divine, the transcendental ethic is still sufficiently real that it might stop you from dying. Well, that's real enough.
Or society from crumbling down.
Well, right.
Exactly, because if the way I looked at it, it's like, all right, if we start going into our minds and we start to, and I've been accused of this by friends, for example, when they're in love, and I go, yeah, you're just high on hormones, and they're like, come on, man, this is the last thing I want to hear right now. I'm having the best time of my life right now, and you're reasoning it to bits. Right. And I think it's very good to have a higher purpose or something like a value you can, strive after to, first of all, become better than you are. But second of all, also like a sort of group best practices, sort of say. Mm-hmm. And that's something that, well, it kind of opened my eyes, because rationality isn't, I always thought that was the way for civilization or mankind to make it out of the, Mirkwood and transcend to whatever it is our goal is in the universe, the cosmos.
Well, you know what Einstein said is, I believe it was Einstein, your theory should be as simple as it can be, but no simpler. And so that's the thing about reductionism. It's like your friend's in love and you say, well, that's hormones. It's like, well, yeah, but what you're implying is that it's just hormones. Yes. And by implying that, you're implying that you know what hormones are. Well, you don't. There's so much you don't know about hormones that it's just beyond belief, right? And like you don't know how they produce their subjective effect, for example. You don't have a clue about that. So you could say that they're just hormones. The problem with that is the just part. It's like, what makes you think that hormones aren't something miraculous? What makes you think they don't have a spiritual dimension? Because they clearly do. So that's that the problem isn't biological reductionism. It's biological reductionism that doesn't know its limits. Now, when I've been doing these biblical lectures, I'm being a reductionist. I'm saying that I'm going to treat these stories from the psychological perspective. But I'm also saying at the same time, that doesn't mean that's all there is to them. And I could say, well, the psychological perspective is good enough. It can illuminate the stories and open them up to people. But, so like, here's a question. So let's say there's an emergent transcendental ethic that emerges. It's something like it emerges as the consequence of the observation of the structure of games that can be played many times and that are self-improving. Because maybe that's how you want to live your life. You want to live it so that it's a pretty good game today, it's a good game tomorrow and the next week. And so you can maintain it. It's sustainable. But it's better than that. It's sustainable and incrementally improving. And then you think, okay, what's the nature of a sustainable game that's incrementally improving? You could say, well, there's no nature above and beyond its practicality. But maybe there is a nature above and beyond its practicality because we don't know what being is aiming at. Now, maybe it's aiming at nothing. Maybe it's just the quasi-deterministic force that the scientists claim. But maybe it's not. And so for me, it's to leave, it's not to close the door on what. So I talk about God a lot in the biblical lectures, obviously, because, we don't have to explain why that would be.
It's kind of hard to go around them, yeah.
Exactly. And so, and people say, well, do you believe in God? It's a question I don't like at all. It's not the right question. You can look at the stories, and the stories make tremendous sense psychologically, and they imply something divine. And I'm not willing to dispense with the implication because, for example, I'm not willing to dispense with the idea that there's something divine about consciousness. I think that's like a definition of divine. Whatever consciousness is, that's divine. You say, well, is there any reality to what's divine? Well, consciousness is divine. Well, it's an axiomatic statement in some sense. I would say, well, why is it divine? Well, it can call forth order from potential. That's an element of divinity. You say, well, that isn't really what I mean by divine. It's like, well, what really do you mean by divine exactly? Is it is it something eternal? Well, I don't know, because I don't know what consciousness is like.
I have an idea about that. I think it's the force that drives this game that we're playing.
Well,
whatever that might be.
Okay, well, but that's a very archetypal idea. There is, like, one of the deepest mythological ideas is that, well, there's nature, and there's culture, and there's consciousness. Those are the three things, and consciousness. All three of those play a causal role, or it's nature, culture, and consciousness. That's the individual in some sense, and it seems to me that that's as true as anything that can be said. And there's more to it. That's how you act in the world. Like, you act towards other people as if they're active mediators between order and chaos. And if you don't, they do not want to play with you. And I think, oh, that's interesting. So here we are in a situation where no one will play with you unless you treat them like they're the divine mediator of order and chaos. And people say, well, what do you mean by that? It's like, well, I act like you have free will. I act like your choices are important. I act like you're a responsible person or should be held responsible. No, I act like you can learn from your mistakes, all of those things. And if I don't do that, then really you don't want to have anything to do with me. So now you might say, well, that's not proof. It's like, well, it depends on how you define proof. It's a kind of proof. So,
well, it's definitely something you can observe in people.
Right, exactly. Yeah. You can observe that they act as if that's true. It doesn't mean it's true. Yeah. But it certainly raises the suspicion that it might be true.
Yeah. Back to that little bit about divinity and something that I heard you say before, there seems to be something going on right now with humankind. You can't quite put your finger on it. And I was always, when I listen to that, I always think like, well, it's sort of obvious what's going on if you look at mankind's history. Like we're gaining complexity. Mm-hmm. That's what we do. I mean, if you look at the Neanderthals and where we are right now, what we're doing is we're gaining complexity. And that's because we are learning more about the world. And the more we learn about the world, the more we start to realize how incredibly elegant our cosmos and our universe is. We had an astronomer here, and he tells us about the fact that, for example, if the configuration of our universe, the rate at which helium converts to some other element was only slightly less.
Entropic principle.
Yeah, then this entire existence would not exist. Yeah. You and I would not be having this conversation right now. And if I think about stuff like that, it's all either it's a big set of occurrences and it's just luck, or if you look at everything, how everything fits together, my rational mind only goes like, this is almost too convenient that it all works like this. And if you look at the board that we're playing at, that seems to be aiming at more complexity. So that's sort of the way I feel about that. How do you look at that?
I like the idea of it. It's like more sophistication in some sense. And there is a drive towards that, or there is a movement towards that. People, that the real, like, what would you say, that sort of militant evolutionary biologists say, well, there's no aim in Darwinian evolution. And I understand what they mean. And I understand why they say it. And it's a powerful point for reasons we won't go into. But by the same token, life was a lot simpler than 3.5 billion years ago than it is now. There is this drive towards, and not at every level. There's still lots of single-celled organisms, right? So, but there's certainly part of the game has emerged and transformed itself at ever-increasing levels of neurological complexity, for example.
Especially if you zoom in at the part that we just described as divine, the consciousness. So I don't know if dolphins can be considered truly conscious. I think they can. They don't seem to have that tendency, but us humans definitely do. And I think our consciousness
they're conscious. I don't know how self-conscious they are. They're somewhat self-conscious.
Yeah,
they can recognize themselves in mirrors.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it's a pretty low level of self-consciousness to recognize yourself in a mirror. I mean, human beings have a delineated self-model of themselves that they're constantly updating. We're self-conscious in about 10 different dimensions. And some animals have the rudiments of that. Elephants do.
Yeah.
Chimpanzees seem to, dolphins seem to, but compared to our elaborated self-consciousness and our clear knowledge of death, there's a big gap. Elephants play with death, you know. They play with, but they definitely mourn, and other animals mourn. I've seen dogs mourn and cats mourn, but elephants will go to where there are bones and check them out. It's like they're right on the cusp of knowledge, I would say, but they're not linguistic, so I don't think they can manage it.
Yeah, but it seems to me that once consciousness rises above a certain level and it's able to do the stuff that you just described, then it starts gaining complexity. There's just this thirst in us that can't be quelled somehow. We want to gain more knowledge.
Yep.
If you talk to an astronomer, they're giddy about how much we do not know yet.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good example of the biological instantiation of the hero myth. You know, we're designed to boldly go where no one has gone before.
I love that. You're a Star Trek fan, by the way.
Yeah, but that's why Star Trek is such a big deal. Why these heroic adventures? It's mythology for engineers, right? It's religion for engineers, essentially. And there is a great adventure in going where you don't know and mastering the territory.
Yeah. And if you look at the Star Trek universe in particular, that these guys, what I always liked about it, especially the old Star Trek, is that they were all like these almost archetypical heroes. They always did the right thing. They were always going, like they had their directives, and of course they were humans and they made mistakes, but there was this moral that seemed to be so much higher than what we had in this particular time at Earth. And it was something to strive for. Like Captain Picard could be a role model for leadership in a lot of senses.
Well, that's exactly what he is. And he is a role model for leadership. That's why people are watching him, because, you know, any leader, a fictional leader like that, is a fictional leader is a quasi-messiah, right? It's a fragment of the messianic archetype. And so it might be the fragment that particularly appeals to you. So if you're a techie, you know, you want your messiah to be captaining a starship.
Yes.
And that's where you get your fragmentary messianic vision. And it's important, it's vital. And you see that with Star Wars. All these people, they say, well, I'm atheist to the core. Or you're a Star Wars fan. Oh, yes, I'm a great Star Wars fan. It's like, well, those two statements don't go together. So, and it's obvious. With Star Wars, for example, the screenplay was specifically influenced by Joseph Campbell's work, who was, of course, a devotee of Jung and who studied archetypal patterns of behavior. It's not a hypothesis to say that geeky atheistic engineers get their religion through Star Wars. It's just a statement of fact. So, and we should pay attention to that, because those things, I'm not making fun of that, not in the least. I think these stories are so vital that it's good that you get them in whatever manner you can get them.
It's funny if you think about it. Like Star Wars is atheism. You have these guys in robes believing in an intangible force called the Force.
Right. Well, exactly.
It doesn't get more religious than that.
And it's a straight morality play. It's good versus evil.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's right. It doesn't get any more religious than that. And you see the same thing with Harry Potter. He's a dying and resurrecting hero, for God's sake. He's touched by evil, and Voldemort is clearly a satanic figure. So.
How do you feel about the tool of the heroic journey and using that to project yourself as a hero as you go on?
Oh, it's exactly what should happen. That's what it means to be properly enculturated, is that you see yourself as part of the ancestral succession of heroes. That's what you're doing. That's what you should be doing. You want to live up to that, That's why you should have some gratitude towards your culture, is that it's established by these flawed figures of the past, obviously, but that's good because you're flawed too. These people who at least rose above their flawed nature to some degree and established something wonderful, which is something that you should be striving for. That makes life worth living. So,
I think we're going to close off this podcast. Mr. Peterson, thank you so much for coming out. This was great. A milestone for me personally, but I think for our podcast as well. So,
and I mentioned earlier, I'll get you a discount code for the self-authoring program.
I'm going to shout it out right now, because I'm just going to tell you what to make the code.
Yep.
So guys, if you want a taste of this and you want to start your own heroic journey today, you can order the self-authoring program we talked about, so the goal-setting program in its most lean form at selfauthoring.com. And if you use the promotional code EINDBAZEN, you will probably get a nice discount, right?
You'll get a 20% discount.
A 20% discount, so go ahead and buy that right now. All right, guys, thank you for listening. Thank you for coming out. Same to your lovely wife who has been sitting here patiently listening to us. And I think she's heard this particular spiel quite a lot, but thank you so much for coming.
Well, thanks very much for the invitation.
That's it.
All right.
Ciao.